Like, straight up, no exaggeration, they sounded like just a horrible local butt rock band. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and welcome back to episode number 3 of Side Projects That Sucked, or sometimes it didn't suck, where I look at side projects and supergroups from the rock and metal world, and I ask the question, did they actually suck? Or was it one of the, honestly, kind of rare occasions where the side project was actually better and more popular than the band that created it? And today, we will be looking at side projects from Korn, Green Day, Rancid, New Found Glory, Under Oath, Fear Factory, and more to decide, did they suck or not? But first, if you haven't, I wanted to mention that I'm streaming twice a week on Twitch, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 7 p.m. PST. So if you want to come hang out, have some fun, check that out at the link in the description of this video. And also, I want to thank Allform for sponsoring this video. Allform is Helix/Birch's sister brand of sofas and chairs that are American made and easy to assemble. And now, more than ever, it's important to make the most of your time at home. For me, my wife and I both work from home, so we spend a lot of time in our house, which is why I was so excited to partner with Allform for this video. You can customize your sofa to your space and your style by creating over 500 unique combinations with seat numbers, corners, chases, and ottomans. They make it easy to find the perfect furniture for your space, your way, with a modular design. And based on our space, we chose the 3-seat sofa in black with a chase. And we just moved into this new house, so we wanted a sofa that fit our new living room. Something nicer than the cheap one we had before, and felt a little bit more modern and elevated. And you can put your Allform sofa together in as little as 15 minutes. Setup is super easy with completely tool-free assembly. And because Allform ships direct to consumer, they're able to use really premium materials, but still at a reasonable price. Shipping is fast and free, and if it makes you nervous to buy something that you haven't tried, no worries. Allform has a 100-day trial, so you get more than 3 months to make sure that you love it. And if you don't, they'll pick it up for you and give you a full refund. Just visit the link below or go to this URL for 20% off the sofa of your choice. And first up, let's talk about Transplants. This is a band that came up quite a bit in the comment sections of my first 2 episodes of this series. Transplants have been kind of retconned as like a Travis Barker side project, but the band actually started as a side project of Tim Armstrong from Rancid, who then brought in Travis on drums, and tons of guests on vocals like Davey Havoc, Ezek from Scarhead, Ezek's cousin Rob, who was actually a full-time member of the band, Cypress Hill, and tons more.
Gangsters and thugs, criminals and hoods. Some of my friends sell records, some of my friends sell drugs.
You may also remember them from being in not 1, but 2 shampoo commercials in the mid-2000s, which I always thought was kind of funny and random.
Garnier Fructis, the first fortifying shampoo with active fruit concentrate from Garnier.
And personally, I think this band is incredible. There's really nothing else like it. It's kind of like punk with like organs, with Travis Barker playing drum and bass kind of beats, and of course, Tim Armstrong's hooks, which are just the best in the business. I've said before that I think he may very well be the single best punk songwriter of all time. If that sounds weird, well, honestly, it kind of is, but it is also great, and I still listen to this band to this day. But next up, a side project that, honestly did not go quite so well was Fieldy's Dreams, which was the rap side project from Korn's bassist Fieldy, which, if you didn't know, his name was originally Fieldy's Nuts. Very clever, very subtle.
Got him!
And Fieldy's Dreams put out 1 album in 2002 called Rock and Roll Gangster, and it is not good.
I'm the best in the West, no stress, sticks, steals, seeds.
Fulfilling my needs, feel these dreams. Searching for some weed. Ain't never gonna stop till the day that I drop.
And I don't want to be rude because he seems like a cool guy, and I absolutely love his bass playing, but this honestly just sounds like some local rapper from Bakersfield who made a bunch of money selling weed and spent it all on recording his terrible, terrible rap album. It really is that bad. But still, you know that there is some Korn mega fan out there who's still bumping this every day in the car, probably like some 1983 Cutlass, the one with like the wire spoke rims, wearing the Fieldy signature shoe that Tribal did back in the day. And next up, on the heavier side of things, we have Brujeria. This mysterious band appeared on the scene in 1993 when their first album came out called Matando Güeros, which basically means like killing white people in Spanish. And this album made quite an impression. I probably can't show it on here without getting demonetized, but the cover of the album has somebody holding a severed head on it. And on the inside, there's all these gore photos of people dismembered and stuff. And the story behind the band that was circulated at the time was that these were Mexican drug dealers who worshiped Satan and for some reason decided to start a grindcore band. Obviously very over the top and goofy, but the real punchline was that the band was actually really good, especially their second album, Raza Odiada, which means hated race, referring to Chicanos. And this was the 90s, so a lot of people, including me, to be honest, thought that that backstory was real. Like, oh my gosh, there are these satanic Mexican drug dealers. It's so crazy. Can you believe it? Although eventually people found out the real lineup of the band, which was Dino and Raymond from Fear Factory, Billie from Faith No More, and I think Jim from Down by Law, which is a super random, very non-death metal, very non-Chicano lineup for the most part, which just made it that much funnier. And so to answer the question of was Brujeria good? I would say yes. At least like by the standards of grindcore, they were great. Especially if you know enough Spanish to understand the lyrics, which are just absolutely ridiculous and hilarious. My personal favorite is Narcos Consejos, which means like advice for drug dealers. And in the song, he's like giving advice to, I guess, all the would-be drug dealers in the audience about like how you should sell cocaine to white people, but not to Latinos. If by some chance you like grindcore and you have not checked out Brujeria, you definitely should. And next up, we have Stone Sour, who a lot of people think of as Corey Taylor from Slipknot's side project, but that is not quite right because he was actually in Stone Sour before he was in Slipknot, along with Jim Root, who also ended up being in Slipknot. And what's bizarre to me is that Slipknot was absolutely awful back then, back in the days before he was in Slipknot. Like, truly terrible. Like, straight up, no exaggeration, they sounded like just a horrible local butt rock band. And it's so weird listening to that because I think Corey is one of the all-time best vocalists in rock and metal. He is just an absolute beast. So listening to that, it's like, how is that the same guy? And what were they thinking? Because nothing about this is good. And I'm just so genuinely curious what the guys in Slipknot heard there that was like, oh, that's the guy. We gotta get him and their guitars. These are the guys that are gonna blow us up and make our band one of the most successful, famous bands in the history of metal. Like, what? I have questions. But that was the 90s version of Stone Sour. The version of this band that most people know from the mid-2000s was them coming back from hiatus, and obviously they got way, way better. Personally, I'm not like a huge fan of this style in general, so to me, I would say it's still kind of mid. Just kind of your standard Midwest butt rock that you'd hear at a festival called
This is Rocktopia,
headlined by like 6 a.m. and sponsored by Devour Frozen Foods. But I wouldn't say they suck. I would give Stone Sour, the later version of it at least, I'd give them a solid 6 out of 10. And next up, we have Sect. S-E-C-T. This is a hardcore supergroup featuring Andy from Fall Out Boy and Race Trader, Scott from Earth Crisis, rounded out by members of Day of Suffering, Catharsis, and The Swarm. Basically, all the coolest vegan straight edge bands that I loved in 1998. And it might be surprising to hear that Andy from Fall Out Boy is in this band because I think a lot of people still aren't aware of that band's roots in the 90s hardcore scene. But if you look it up, they go way back. Pete was in bands like Vegan Reich and Extinction and Birthright. Patrick was apparently in some grindcore band, but I've never heard it. In any case, their roots go deep. And does Sect suck? Absolutely not. No, it is actually pretty great. Very raw, filthy, nasty kind of stuff that's almost like a mix of Entombed and D-Beat, almost like Harm's Way, but maybe with a less kind of beefy vocalist. Although, to be fair, isn't everybody less beefy than the singer of Harm's Way?
Just want cash, some strings attached, so we can sort it out.
But next up, we have Hollywood Vampires, another supergroup that this time did not work out quite so well. If you're not familiar, it's basically like the biggest stars of 1987 got together and started a band. It is Johnny Depp on guitar with Alice Cooper, who is obviously a legend, as well as Joe Perry of Aerosmith, also on guitar. And there's really no other way to say it, it's bad. Not good. Alice Cooper and Johnny Depp actually both seem like really cool guys, so I feel kind of bad saying it, and I am incredibly jealous of how devastatingly good looking Johnny Depp is, even now at his age. Still one of the most attractive human beings ever put on this earth, and it hurts my soul to look at him. And I feel bad for how we got kind of screwed over with all the stuff with his ex-wife and all that stuff. But still, I gotta keep it real. This is terrible, just like awful kind of, I guess, blues dad rock, you could call it.
I need my now. I want my now.
It makes me think of guys you see at NAMM, the kind of guys that are in bar bands who still wear leather pants and chunky silver rings and those white button-up shirts that look like something off the cover of a romance novel. Basically, bands that dress like Johnny Depp playing Captain Jack Sparrow. So yeah, respect to these guys as humans, but this band is not great. And next up, another band that a lot of people brought up in the comments of my previous episodes, Them Crooked Vultures, which is another supergroup, but this time it is Dave Grohl, obviously of Foo Fighters and Nirvana, Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, and John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, and they did one album in 2009. And personally, I'm not a big fan of classic rock or garage rock or any 70s music, really, or any of the other stuff that they're kind of drawing from with this project. So I wouldn't personally choose to listen to it, but objectively speaking, I do think it's very well done. Everybody in this band is obviously extremely talented, some of the best to ever do what they do. I can especially appreciate Dave Grohl's drumming on this album because it's very different from kind of what we know him as. It has this very distinct Led Zeppelin kind of flavor to it without him like trying to be John Bonham, but obviously kind of influenced by Bonham's playing. Very cool stuff that I think really shows off his range as a musician. And I can also appreciate how just kind of like layered and organic all the arrangements are. It really does feel like some sort of undiscovered rock album from the 70s, and I can give him credit for that. And speaking of Queens of the Stone Age, that brings us to A Perfect Circle, which, as most of you guys probably know, was or is, I don't know if they're really active or not, a supergroup which I originally sort of thought of as a side project of Maynard James Keenan from Tool, but I think actually ended up being way, way more than that. And I say that because the band also had Troy from Queens of the Stone Age in it, as well as Josh Freese from the Vandals. And also the band itself, it turns out, wasn't actually even Maynard's idea at all. It was actually the guitarist Billie Howardell who wrote all the original songs and demos and got Maynard on board to be the vocalist. So really, it's Billie's band more than anyone else's. Maynard is just obviously the most famous person, so he kind of gets associated with it. And the second reason I say that is because A Perfect Circle actually ended up becoming extremely successful. They did 4 albums, all of which ended up hitting the top 5 on Billboard, and at least at the time of their first album, I would say they were kind of pretty much on equal footing with Tool as far as commercial success. And also, it was really good. You know, most super groups and side projects kind of tend to suck, and A Perfect Circle definitely does not. I make fun of Tool fans a lot for, you know, all the reasons that everyone makes fun of Tool fans, but I do respect the band, and I actually used to like them a lot. I saw them several times in the kind of early 90s around like the Opiate era, and I always thought they were really good. And A Perfect Circle kind of reminds me of that era of Tool, but a bit more straightforward, less kind of dark and noodly. Like their first album in particular, I think is pretty great, definitely holds up to this day. But on the other hand, we have Puscifer, which from what I can tell is basically Maynard's side project where he kind of just does whatever the fuck he wants. Not even really sure what to call them other than just kind of weird and avant-garde. Kind of like something Mike Patton might do, only not as interesting and also not kind of as antagonizing as Mike Patton's projects tend to be. And honestly, I find their music to be just kind of boring. It's not really bad or anything like that. It's just sort of meandering and directionless. Not a lot of hooks or dynamics. But still, you can't really say the music is bad necessarily. It's really the lyrics and artwork where they really start to veer into the territory of bad. For example, their first album is called V for Vagina, which is easily one of the worst album names of all time. And the cover art, like, I do not know what they were thinking. It legit looks like the demo for some local nu metal band from 1998. I am not even exaggerating. Especially because, keep in mind, this came out in 2007. This is when Maynard was like 37 or so and rich as fuck, already very famous and successful. So how he ended up putting an album out with this title and artwork this bad is legitimately a mystery to me. So did it suck? Well, I would say yes, it sucks. Like, if this wasn't Maynard involved and if it didn't have that fanatical kind of devotion that anything related to Tool has, I think Puscifer would be forever stuck in local band status. And moving on, let's talk about a band called Pinhead Gunpowder, which I think a lot of people think of as a Green Day side project, although again, that's not really true. Not exactly. And I say that because even though Billie Joe is in the band and because Billie Joe is so famous, again, he's gonna kind of get a lot of credit for the band. Really, it's not his band. It was started by a guy named Aaron Comet Bus, who is a Bay Area punk legend, best known for his zine called Comet Bus, and is also the primary songwriter in Pinhead Gunpowder. I think Billie Joe only wrote like 3 or 4 songs for the band.
If I said I could go on never without you, that would be a lie. But if you knew how it looked inside my head, my house is bad enough.
But still, you might listen to this and think, oh, this is pretty cool. This sounds just like early Green Day. What do you mean it's not Billie Joe's band? And you're not wrong. It definitely does sound like that, but I think really that's because they're both coming from the same reference of that moment in time, of that East Bay punk kind of sound. And I would say that aside from Green Day, Pinhead Gunpowder is probably the single best example of that late 80s, early 90s East Bay kind of sound. Really, really good stuff. Kind of like old Green Day, but a little bit more punk. And that's also why I think it's so cool. The band stayed active until like 2011 or something. I wouldn't be surprised to see them play some kind of reunion show or whatever. So they were active, obviously, many years after Billie Joe was already super successful, you know, traveling around the world being a rock star, who had tons of other things he could be doing. For example, like when Green Day did that weird Broadway show. And so you have to think, the reason why he kept playing in Aaron Comet Bus's old school Bay Area punk band is because he wanted to. Because he loves that scene and that sound and he wanted to do something fun with his friends. And personally, I always think it's really cool when you see people who have reached the level of success like him, Andy from Fall Out Boy, Davey Havok, all these other people who continue to do something that sort of reflects the roots that they came from, because it just sort of lets you know they're one of these people that may have achieved a lot of success, but they never really forgot their roots and they never really changed who they were as a person. And last but not least, we have an interesting little side project called Hazen Street, which was a project with members of Madball, H2O, Cro-Mags, and of all bands, New Found Glory, which I guess unsurprisingly pretty much sounded like a mix of all those bands. I would call it sort of like groovy, melodic hardcore, I guess. And the thing about it to me that's very interesting is that this was a very surprising crossover at the time, because for most people back then, pop punk and hardcore like just did not mix. This is oil and water, just two completely different polar ends of the spectrum. And these days it's different. If anything, I would say that pop punk and hardcore actually kind of go together now, but it was definitely not like that back then. And I think this project is probably a big part of why that changed. And in particular because of Chad from New Found Glory, who, as a lot of people know, every time I mention them, people show up in the comments to say, oh, I can't believe you didn't mention that he was in Shai Hulud. Well, there you go. Now I am mentioning it. As a lot of you guys know, Chad came from the hardcore scene, and he did a lot to really bring those two scenes together, with Hazen Street as a very early example of that. He actually had to quit the band, like right around the time their album came out because of contract disputes, but he wrote all the songs, he played on the record. You can hear his fingerprints all over it. And I think they broke up in 2007 or something something like that. The band did not last very long. Actually, I think they've done some festival appearances here and there, maybe a couple of reunions or something. But the band essentially only lasted for one album, which I thought was kind of a bummer because I thought that they really were onto something here. They had like kind of a cool sound that didn't quite come together on this album. Like it was good, but I think they could have made something really special if they just had like one more album to explore the sound a little bit more. All right, my friends, that does it for this installment of rock and metal side projects that sucked or didn't. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see another episode of this, and if so, who I should talk about. Also, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my podcasts a week early. I do giveaways, I do Q&As. There's also a way to have me review your music. All you need to do is join at the $10 and up level. Every month I do a call for submissions. Just put a link to your music in the comments of that post. Then I will review them live on Twitch and post them on Patreon for everybody. So if that sounds cool, just check it out at the link in the description of this video. And with that, I will sign off for now, but I will see you next time.